So, the media has really started to push this Claude Giroux thing. Even though in the previous video we discussed how Claude Giroux has a full no-move clause, he holds the power in this situation. He is the guy that, should he actually want to stay put in Philadelphia, will indeed stay put in Philadelphia. There still are conversations that NHL insiders are talking about when it comes to where Claude Giroux could end up. Today's source comes from the fourth period. This is a conversation that David Pagnotta has with Dennis Bernstein, and they go over some of the market rumblings regarding the NHL. It's on the fourth period, it's on Twitter, so I'll leave a link in the description to the video if you want to go ahead and watch this. But they do indeed have an extended conversation about one Philadelphia Flyers captain, Claude Giroux. If you want the entire rundown of Giroux and the profile he boasts, I don't really want to go too deep into it because we already made a video talking about that a few days ago, so you can go ahead and watch the Claude Giroux Colorado Avalanche video for the entire scoop there. But to run things down, he's 34, 5'11", 185, a right-handed winger center who could play all positions. He's got himself a contract making $8.275 million a season. It expires at the end of this year, and Claude Giroux is still a very capable, very productive NHL player. He's been one of the best in the NHL in the early 2010s, even though towards the end of the 2010s, and even today, he is still very capable and very productive. Still, he's got 34 points in 40 games played for a very bad Philadelphia Flyers team this season, and because the prime of his career has been wasted in Philadelphia, no playoff runs, no real extended level of success, there is somewhat of an idea that says Claude Giroux might say, okay, I kind of want to win now. Like, let's get traded right here. Let's get moving. Send me to a team that actually wants my services and that could actually do well in the playoffs. Now, you take a look at the teams that are talked about here in the fourth period that could be interested in Claude Giroux. One of them that is highlighted in the video is indeed the Colorado Avalanche team. We talked about them a few days ago, as I have been saying the entire time. But Claude Giroux on a Colorado team would be pretty stacked because you already have so many other really top-tier talents on that squad. But of course, because one team is interested does not mean that they are the only team involved. The other teams that are actually mentioned in this video are the Minnesota Wild, the Boston Bruins, and the Anaheim Ducks. Let's have a conversation about each of these three teams over here regarding Claude Giroux and what he could bring to those teams, and just how everything could work out. So, starting off with Anaheim right here, they mentioned in the video that because they don't really have a good second-line center, they could have themselves some Claude Giroux time if they really wanted to. Or they could say, okay, Ryan Getzlaf could be the number 2 guy, and we could have Claude Giroux as our number 1. It actually does sound like a pretty interesting combination, especially when you consider how Terry and Zegras and the rest of the forward core is playing out. These guys are wingers on the Anaheim Ducks and not necessarily centers, so having a 1-2 punch of Giroux and Getzlaf, I mean, if you mentioned that 10 years ago, that would have been one of the best 1-2 center punches anybody could have even thought about. But just having the offensive versatility of a Claude Giroux playing alongside of a Zegras or alongside of a Getzlaf on a power play does sound like a very interesting combination to me. As a Vancouver Canucks fan, I would really much hate to see that because they would torch my team every time they decided to play. For some reason, you know, it always goes down like that. Anaheim always seems to have Vancouver's number, and I just don't seem to understand why. But Claude Giroux coming over would actually make things very interesting too. Now, to me, I personally doubt that Claude Giroux would actually be interested in this kind of move, mostly because when I think about Claude Giroux and his career being wasted, as some Philadelphia Flyers fans like to go out there and talk about, if you really want to go out there and say that Claude Giroux is indeed feeling so unfortunate in himself because of everything that has gone around the past few years, if you really want to say that Claude is fed up and he wants to go out there and he wants to win, I don't know if Anaheim is that team to go out there and get the job done in a trade. I don't really know if Anaheim is the team that Claude Giroux thinks about in his head, and he says, yeah, you know, I've wasted my career in Philly, I haven't had any playoff success, I need to go to a team that's going to go out there and win me a Stanley Cup, I'm going to go to Anaheim. I don't really think Anaheim is that team. Now, sure, the Ducks are doing well this season, they've got 52 points in 46 games played, they're second in the Pacific as I record this video, but I'm not really too sure. Because Anaheim was not really supposed to be all too great this season. Trevor Zegras was not really supposed to be as good as he is right now. Troy Terry just kind of exploded out of nowhere. I think This is a team that's a product of circumstance. They're going out there taking advantage of everything they have and saying, hey, okay, we can string together wins. We can do this. Great. But are they a bona fide Stanley Cup playoff contender? I'm not really too sure. Now, the other three teams you could go out there and debate are in a different territory. Colorado, they are a Stanley Cup contender, and there's nobody that's going to go out there and dispute that. Minnesota's in a position where they are fourth in the Central, but this team is still at a pretty good 53-point mark in 38 games played. So Minnesota is kind of in that position where they've exploded as well, although the Wild have had some pretty good consistent regular season success, not too much playoff success though, so I'm not really too sure if they would fit this criteria of a vindicating team either. But because Minnesota has sort of built themselves into this juggernaut over the past few months, it does make a little bit more sense, especially considering that they have more points than the first place Pacific Division Vegas Golden Knights do. Like, if Minnesota was in the Pacific, they would be first. They're fourth right now in the Central. It's just kind of indicative of how good that division is. But then you go over onto what exactly the Wild have built. Of course, they have Kaprizov, they have Fiala, they have a lot of good players on their team. Ryan Hartman has come out of nowhere and started being one of the best players in the NHL when it comes to putting the puck in the net, which is kind of crazy to me. You're getting very good production throughout your entire Minnesota Wild lineup, and if Claude Giroux says, yeah, you know, I'm tired of being on this Philadelphia Flyers team where I'm the main guy and everybody else kind of sucks, let's go to a very well-rounded, very high-octane, offensively capable team in Minnesota, and maybe we can both win cups for the first time. Sounds pretty interesting, doesn't it? Meanwhile, the last few teams over here, Colorado, we already talked about. We made an entire 10-minute video about that, so I don't really think we need to talk about that here. But the Boston Bruins are kind of on a different side of the spectrum, because Boston has been so good for so long, yet this year they are such a one-line team that I don't really know if Claude Giroux looking at the NHL and saying, okay, what teams are there that I can go on to and win a Stanley Cup? I don't really know if Boston is in that conversation anymore. Now, if you had asked me like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, last year, maybe even, if Boston is a possibility, I'd say yeah. If any veteran wants to go out there and win themselves a Stanley Cup, just sign in Boston. Again, tried it, it didn't work, but alas, it's still something that I think you could actually try and pull off maybe. But for Boston, this team today is a lot weaker than they had been previously, and that's very much exemplified by the way they're getting their points. As we said, their reputation this season is that they are a one-line team, and even though they are one of the playoff teams in the East right now, they got 51 points in 40 games played, taking up the last wildcard spot. This is a team that still has a lot more questions than answers when it comes to how good they're going to be in the postseason this year. Does Claude Giroux go out there and solve everything? Do you add another winger to this team to push the brush down even more and to try to get that spark going with Taylor Hall? Maybe, but is that guaranteed to work? I'm not really too sure. I think that if I was Claude Giroux in this position, and I had to choose, okay, one team out of all these teams to go out there and play for in order to actually try to win a Stanley Cup on, Colorado would be first by a mile. I'd probably put the Wild ahead of the Bruins just because I really do like the system that the Wild have built for themselves. Boston would come up next, and then Anaheim is kind of in there too. You could kind of mix and match the last few teams, but I really do think that Colorado should be that team that Claude Giroux goes out there and decide for himself, because he ultimately does hold all the power in this situation. Again, he has a no-move clause. So talk to me in the comments, if you were Claude Giroux, where would you want to go amongst all these four teams? The Minnesota Wild, the Bruins, the Ducks, and the Avalanche. I think it should be an easy slam dunk, but we still can converse about a whole bunch of other stuff too, especially if you're a fan of the Ducks or the Wild or the Bruins. So if you're a fan of any of these other teams, then hey, talk to me in the comments. Would you want a Claude Giroux added onto your squad? And what do you think it takes to get him? He does have 1 year left on his contract. It's this season, so it expires once the offseason commences. And he's making a pretty significant $8.275 million. So what is the price tag for that? He can probably go out there and get you maybe 65, 70 points in a full 82-game season, maybe a bit more if he's playing on your team instead of the Flyers, because the Flyers are pretty bad, so like, what's the price for a guy like this in his mid-30s doing the things that he's doing? These are just 4 of the potentially 31 teams out there in the NHL that the guys on the fourth period are saying could be interested in Giroux. So talk to me in the comments if you're a fan of any other team. Would you want this guy in your squad as well? I hope you enjoyed this video, and Bye.